Hi guys, Alec, Peirce, Scuba Tech Tips. This is a very controversial topic. I love controversial topics because I get lots of comments. Some good, some not so good. But anyway, let's go. Let's do it. Let's talk about filling your scuba tank. Does your local dive store still use a water bath? So by water bath, what I mean is, do they still, when you go into your dive store to get your tank filled, do they put your tank in the water before they fill it? If they do, don't worry about it. If they do, it just means they're a little outdated. Water baths, actually, since the late '80s, has been controversial, and since the early '90s, they have been frowned on. There's no need for a water bath. In fact, it could be potentially a problem. First of all, let's discuss it very, very quickly, just so you understand. The reason for a water bath, it goes back to the 50s when we started filling tanks. And back then, of course, there were steel tanks. They were all made of steel, just like this. Thin wall, that's less than 1/4 of an inch. The wall on this, 3/16 maybe, a bit more than that. Steel tanks like this, rusty, like this. and they were all like that. There were no aluminum tanks. My gosh, aluminum, or light little stuff. They make airplanes and tug tins out of aluminum. You can't use that for scuba. Well, there wasn't enough aluminum around, actually. So anyway, so back in the 50s and the 60s, and when we filled tanks, it was fill it. There you go, it's full. And somebody would pick them up and say, "Wow, that's really hot. Is that going to cool down?" "Oh yeah, jump in the water." And they were quite right. You get into the water and this tank starts to cool down. Well, your divers aren't all stupid. And they started thinking about this. And they, if they fill it fast and it's hot, and then I jump in the water and the tank cools, the air shrinks, I'm not getting as long a dive as I used to. Could be 8, 9, 10, 12 seconds shorter. And so they started to use a water bath. And then somebody else came along and said, "Well, that's good. Because if it's in that water like that, if the tank does have a problem, if the tank explodes, seldom happens, but if the tank explodes," and back then, by the way, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, tanks did explode. Yeah. Usually by bad handling, but also partly because the materials were not very good. But anyway, the thinking was that the tank explodes, the water will absorb the explosion. Yeah. That person obviously was never in a submarine when they were dropping depth charges on it. But anyway, so that was the second thing. And then people would say, "Well, the water baths are good because I dive, off California and so on. I get salt water and get a freshwater water bath at the dive store, rinses it off. That's good for the tank. And you can fill the tank faster too. I want to get back out there, that big fish that I saw that I missed with the spear gun, he's back, I'm sure. So faster fills and so on. But anyway, so let's deal with that. Let's deal with those various things, okay? First of all, yes, you technically can get more air into the tank if it's cold. The difficulty with that is that tanks are supposed to be filled to their stamped pressure. 1800 in the 50s and 60s, 2250 in the late 60s, and then it got up a little higher with a plus rating, 2475, then it climbed to 3000, and now we have tanks at 32, 33, 34, 35. If you're into carbon fiber tanks, it could be 4,500 psi, 4,500 psi. First tank I owned was 1,800. But anyway, my point on that is that the tank has a stamped pressure on it, and that is the pressure that must not be exceeded. It's actually the law. It's actually illegal to fill a tank beyond its stamped pressure. But, very, very difficult to prosecute. But it's bad for the tank. Now, a diver's concern ought to be, number one, safety, right? And then number two, being cheap again, they want their gear to work well and to last a long time. Well, research has shown very definitely that overfilling a tank, even by a marginal amount, damages the tank, very slightly perhaps, but it's cumulative. So if you overfill it a little bit, not a big deal. Again, not a big deal. Again, not a big deal. But every time you overfill it, the tank is stretched very little bit more than it ought to be, and that's cumulative. It does not go back to where it was. If you overfill it, it does not go back. It stays there. And it just shortens the life. Because eventually a hydrostatic test will show that that tank has been overstretched, does not have any elasticity. That's what a hydro test is measuring, the elasticity. And go back to one of my videos. I think we did a video. Kevin will put a link on there to what a hydro test does, and you'll see it measures the elasticity of the tank, the stretch and shrink, stretch and shrink. If you overfill it regularly, it won't stretch and shrink anymore. You're going to lose your tank. So that's definitely not good. Faster fills, well, maybe, but it's the same problem. If you fill them fast, they get hotter. If they get hotter and you fill it to the right pressure, but since it's hot, you get more air in it, and you get overfilled again. So that is not a good idea. As far as them blowing up and the water protecting the operator, no. There's a little bit of water that I've seen in most baths. You know, like some people use a garbage can, fill it right to the top with water, put the tank in it. Yeah. So you got about this much water on each side. Some people use a steel tank made of steel, or sometimes cement. They're actually worse because the pressure, the impact, the pressure of that explosion, which can be, from what I read, can be as much as 1 million pounds of force. Think about it. It's a lot of force. Will shatter concrete, and it'll shred steel. It can't be good to be standing near a steel water bath and it's just exploded in the steel. It can't be good. Plastic is probably the best, although it doesn't seem to be very strong. But the point is, there's not enough water to absorb anything. If you put the tank out in the middle of a swimming pool at the bottom and it exploded, you'd be safe if you're standing on the surface. But you don't do that. So that's, you know, that doesn't help. Cleaning it, what the hell, washes off some of the salt, can't hurt. But the disadvantages of using a water bath would negate that because, again, research has been shown. And they actually do. There are actually people that go around and they go to dive stores and they study what's going on in the dive store and write about it and learn about it. And they do this multiple times. And they have found that often, water gets into your scuba tank during the filling process if they're using a water bath. Now, if they're not using a water bath, the likelihood of water getting in is slim to none. But if you're using a water bath, if the operator is very, very careful, then you ought not to get water in it. But they're not always that careful, especially if it's a fast fill or a hot fill or he's busy, not always that careful. And so water will get into the tank. If it's a steel tank, it can be a problem. If it's an aluminum tank, it still is not good. Water can cause corrosion in an aluminum tank too. It's a different type of corrosion, different chemical process entirely, but it can happen. Water is not good inside the tank, and that can happen. So the various points that people will say, this is why we need a water bath, are not really valid. And it may not be good for the tank. So generally speaking, water baths are out. They're not needed. If a tank is filled slowly, the proper speed, to the right pressure, at room temperature, and done carefully, outside of a water bath, it's filled properly and it's perfectly safe. There's no need for a water bath. It can be detrimental. Proper fill rate, by the way, I mentioned it, just so you can figure out how long it's going to take to fill your tank, is 300 to 600 psi per minute. No more than that. That's right. 300 psi per minute. So a 3,000 psi aluminum tank should take absolute minimum 10 minutes to fill. Now, aluminum tanks have much thicker walls because, as I mentioned earlier, the aluminum is not nearly as strong as metal, as steel. It's not the same strength. It needs to have a thicker wall, and that actually creates a problem. I mean, it makes the tank great. Aluminum tanks are the way to go. They really are. Don't get upset with me, you tech divers who use steel tanks. I didn't say steel tanks are not good. I said for recreational divers, aluminum tanks are the way to go. You know, we don't have to worry so much about corrosion or damage to them. But it does create a minor problem with respect to filling, because if you fill an aluminum tank quickly, it doesn't get as hot as a steel tank. You pick up a steel tank and it filled quickly, it's really hot. It's actually, sometimes I've had tanks filled quickly at dive stores. It's almost, you can't hold your hand on it. It cools off very slowly. Aluminum tank doesn't get that hot. But it's still not good. The heat is still there. The amount of heat generated because of the increase in pressure, it doesn't change. Steel or aluminum doesn't change. But there's so much aluminum metal that it holds that heat. It holds all that heat. You don't feel it as much on the outside. Still the same problems exist. Overfilling, damage, possibly. Anyway, small thing. Maybe you can start an argument at your dive club or your local dive store. Go in and the guy's using your water. Don't get into a fight. Don't say, Alec, Peirce says you're a dummy. Get rid of your water. Don't do that. But now you have a bit of information to make you think about it at least. Okay? Interesting. Take care. Alec, Peirce, Tech Tips. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.